Tech Snippets Today with Joseph Raczynski.
All right. I am ecstatic to have Anders Indset, business philosopher and deep tech investor today. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Happy to be with you.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to this. So there's a lot going on, but first I just wanted to hat tip to what you have just written, another book, and we'll talk about all the other things that are going on. But you're co-author, The Singularity Paradox, Bridging the Gap Between Humanity and AI. All right. So let me sort of tee this up because there's a lot of things happening. I just came back from way too many conferences, but one was a quantum conference here in DC. And many times people had made reference to the fact that the United Nations had named in 2025 that year, this year, the International Year of Quantum Science and Technology, which is obviously a far-reaching revolution because there's so many things that are happening, and there's an explosion of quantum computing that's starting to happen, along with all these other still called emerging technologies, although that probably should change now because they are here, inclusive of AI. So before we go any further, I would love to hear a little bit more about you, of course, a little bit about the book, and even all the other books that you've authored.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Born Norwegian and written 7 books by now. I used to be a hardcore capitalist, so I was very interested about the technological implications on the economy and how change happens when it gets into that capitalism wheel of progress. And I kind of sort of rode that wave for a while. I built my companies. I was also a professional athlete, but I always had that motivation to learn beyond and to dig deeper into these topics. And on the side, I read a lot of philosophy. Was very curious about, the implications of these technologies as they advanced. And I found a lot of reflection points and thinking in philosophy. So I sold my company and I started to write and speak at conferences and think about a lot around. I mean, AI was obvious. This is my initials are AI, so I was very curious about
That's
for
great.
that. And then I had an intuition to also look into the quantum theory and the implications on what happens when the 100-year-old theory is put into life, basically when these technologies advances. So I wrote a book back in 2018 titled The Quantum Economy, where I didn't really take the quantum physical terms to try to squeeze them into the economy and do that kind of sort of reference points to all kinds of weird quantum effects. I was more interested in the implications of exponential technologies to humanity at large, driven by progress. And I think, human beings, we are infinite capable of progress, and this is what we do. And in an optimization society where we offload the authority now to algorithms, the whole narrative of, the old economy, the industrial revolution, where we build machines and we messed up and we error corrected, and we had the optimization game of the new economy where we scaled information and we also made some mistakes and we tried to error correct. Now it's more fundamental. Now basically we are moving into an era where literally everything is doable. And the question is then not can we achieve it, but much more fundamental for the future of humanity, should we do it? So that was the drive. And I wrote about back in 2018, no outlook on war, pandemics, or breakthroughs in AI, no GBT moments. But what was then kind of sort of received as a very futuristic agenda for the 2020s into 2030. Now looking back, many titled me a radical futurist and provocative thesis. And I look at it now and I'm said I was very conservative. So I haven't written some books on leadership and business. I have built a bridge between business and philosophy, and now returning back to investments in technology. And I see philosophy today as a practical tool, and I look at it as kind of sort of the art of being wrong, where I look at the art form of learning. And today I'm very privileged to spend a lot of time to think about these questions. And it's very exciting to see now that the year of quantum has arrived, and UNESCO and the UN are driving that alongside a lot of breakthroughs from the industries. And we are now moving um, ivory towers of academia and the labs into the corporate world, and that where things, now speed up and it gets really exciting. So yeah, so coming back to the last book, The Singularity Paradox, I teamed up with a quantum physicist friend of mine 2 years ago, and we wrote one book, Ex Machina, The God Experiments, where we pondered the simulation hypothesis, coming out of a night in Vienna at one of these quintessential bars
Funny.
where I challenged quantum physicists. And it led to the book that we have just now published in the US titled Singularity Paradox, Bridging the Gap Between Humanity and AI, where we look at the implications of these technologies. And our core argument is simply that we think, just building super godlike intelligence in a machine might be a very dangerous path for humanity. We think it's better to start off with the human being, with a mensch, and evolve from that. So we argue of hacking biology and chemistry and taking evolution into our own hand and creating what we have called artificial human intelligence. And we see that as a much more promising path to beyond and to just to strive for progress. So this is a short compendium of my work and my latest work and my thoughts on quantum and AI. So I'm happy to dive into that with you,
No,
Joseph.
that's a great setup for where I hope to go with this. There's so much to talk about. Now, let me set the context for where I'd like to go, and then we can go in other directions as well. So like I said, have been to probably 4 conferences in the last month, and my body is drained because there's late nights, long sessions, all sorts of things that are happening. One was at MIT for their MTech AI event. Another was in Dubai for an AI blockchain event. I just came back from Toronto for an AI blockchain event. And one of the things that's wild is I've been going to these conferences for better part of 8 years, not the AI part, but like a blockchain conference and emerging technology conferences. And I would sit down and have conversations with people about how things are moving in terms of exponential growth, because I've been sort of a disciple of Dr. Peter Diamandis out in California since 2015, where he was like, we're going to have abundance. Everything's going to come together. Yes, we have poverty around the world, but we're going to be able to solve all those problems through technology. And I have been someone that's really into this mindset and concept for a long time, up until maybe 2 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago at this point, where things have shifted. I was at an event where Jeffrey Hinton came out, the godfather of AI. I'm sure you know this, and he was like, "Wait a second here. We're in a bit of a spot. If we don't gather people together around the world and get everyone on the same page about AI alignment, then things could easily fall off the rails at this point in time. We could have a lot of issues going forward." There has since been much more conversation around that.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not trying to go down the doomsday scenario necessarily, but even coming back on the plane uh, on Saturday, whatever it was, I watched something. Eric Schmidt, who used to be the CEO of Google, now putting these stories out. And the last story before I want to get your impressions on this thing, is that he is also deeply concerned, more from the military aspect globally, in terms of there is now a race for super intelligence. Let's forget about artificial general intelligence because we're semi there right now, plus or minus a few years, what you want to define that by. But if you get to the point of super intelligence and we're all gunning, I shouldn't say that, we're all racing for that. Um, he said that there's a concern that if it is known that, let's say, I'm going to make up a country because I don't even want to go down the road. Um, Bluetopia is 6 months away from superintelligence, and other countries know that. The idea that Bluetopia now could have that advantage, and then forever, because of an exponential curve, always be ahead because it would have that intelligence to leverage across the board, is a real concern. And so what some countries might do is go after, like pretends, go after bomb, whatever it is, their data centers, things like that. Do you think that we're at a critical moment of time where these people, including yourself, are coming out and talking about this, and most people can't even conceptualize or think about this because it's so far removed from what we're normally thinking of on a
Hmm.
linear standpoint? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, a lot of these things. I mean, if you look at history, we had very clear doomsday scenarios, technologies. So we had wars that led to scientific breakthroughs. The birth of Silicon Valley was literally an outcome of taking all the great physicists, putting them into creating the worst bomb ever, and then after that, funding a region to build amazing technologies, right? And if you take the parallel and you draw some similarities here to what's going on in Ukraine, you could look at how Ukraine is fighting a superior power when it comes to the number of human beings, right? So there is a force that has a lot of human beings, and there is a smaller player that is doing rapid prototyping and adapting technologies by the hour. So there is an insane speed of innovation in just one simple technology, the drone technology. So when Ukraine now sends out drones today, these will not be the same drones next week. So they have an instant reaction on the technology because they are tested every single day, right? And that speeds up innovation and you build great engineers. So hopefully when this war comes to an end, you'll have a great like group of minded people that are very, very advanced in these technologies, which then also can be used for good purposes, right? So the paradox here, or the perversive part of it, is that these terrible circumstances often lead to a lot of positive progress if you look at it. But as we all know, human nature and surviving is not about statistics. It's about each and every individual and human life. So there is a feeling and an emotion to this that they also have a very dystopian note to it. Back in the 80s, Gorbachev did not push the red button because he knew that this would be an existential threat to humanity. And I think this is the challenge with AI and these technologies. It doesn't feel like an existential threat. And this is why we're not taking the same cautious decisions that we have probably done in the past. So even though there have been terrible times, we have grown from 100 million to 8 billion in a very short time frame. We live longer, never has less people died in wars, never had less people lived in absolute poverty. So we have progress, right? By all due respect, not perfect, but the direction has been kind of sort of in a positive way. And now we have like the EAC acceleration movement of utopian optimism. Technology will take care of everything. Then we have the doomsday scenarios of everything that could go wrong. I think between that, there is something that I refer to as, and from a philosophical standpoint, as possibilism, what we could do. And the realm of possibilism requires that we, together with the technology that we create, sit down and think deeply about the problem and its implications, and then take a decision on which future is worth striving for. There will be no wars of tomorrow where a human being will have a relevant role to play on the battlefield. It's all about technology. We have already excelled beyond that, right? So if you look at into 2 or 3 like years into the future, the scenario that you just outlined is in fact a real scenario. If you have a technological advantage, and that is of significance, and you have that exponential progress to that, it's very easy to take that full dominance. And this could not only like apply to wars, but it applied to any field that has a scale effect of economical impact. So in any market, optimization of finance, discoveries of drugs, biology, the convergence of biology, AI, and quantum, literally speaking, right? So all of these are winner takes all scenarios. So I think there is a great challenge for a collective effort for humanity to pull their stuff together and figure out to have some kind of rules and regulations and governance to tackle this. And I think there are smart minds that understand the implications, and as a collective, together with technology, we could come to some conclusions of things that we should not do. But at the moment, it feels like a race towards the achievable and not towards what we should do. So I am also, as much as I see the amazing things that we could do with this technology if applied to the whole of humanity, tackling diseases, Alzheimer's, cancer, tackling poverty, and so on and so forth. I am just as concerned as Eric Schmidt is when it comes to the capabilities on wars and defense and the battlefields and these technologies. but also in terms of like jobs and stability of society due to the rapid pace of automation and humanoid robots entering probably our consumer market by late of this year. So I am, I lean always towards positivism and see the possibilistic future because it's easier to live like that. But I'm also very respectful and also at times concerned about the implications of these technologies. So yeah, I think Eric Schmidt gives a pretty good view of the concerns and challenges that we have. But again, that's the first stepping stone. It's to address these and talk and bring people from various cultures and mindset together and think about what kind of future do we want to build. Once the problem has been identified to at a first principle level, then we have the capabilities to tackle it. So I remain in the field of an optimistic, possibilistic future.
Man, that's got to be nice. No, because I have and I did for so long. And I think the last thing I'll say about this, we don't spend too much more time on it, is I love technology. I've been a technologist since I was a little kid, and I love how things have advanced. I love opening things up and playing around with them. And part of that is like open source, the idea of open source technology, which is, I think, part of the concern here. You have massive organizations that have these closed source models they're tightly controlled, but then you have now the race on the other side. And so that's the part that could get out of control potentially, and people could take advantage of. And if we can't agree upon, this is I hate saying this, but we can't agree upon the environment globally. How in the world will we agree upon getting everyone on the same page about AI alignment or the the positivity of being able to do something for the common good of mankind across the globe when there are small finite groups that may not want that?
Hmm.
All right, enough of that. Unless you
Well,
want to comment about
yeah,
that.
just a remark on that. I think this is also part of the challenge that we look at it on a global scale. So we need to tune it down and we need to get down to a civil conversation. And that starts between you and your neighbor and not at everyone at 8 billion scale. So we need to have micro ambitions. We need to have government and politicians that is not just about putting out the worst type of language and kind of sort of fueling into aggression. And this is how communities have survived throughout humanity, is that you start by getting along with your neighbor. And I believe that we are not born to kill each other or to be destructive. I think every single human being is born into this world with a passion to get up and create and do something. And we're not born, there are psychological damages, but at the core, from human nature, we are good intentionally to do good. We have a potentiality to strive for progress. And we also like to please others to that extent and uplift others. That's a nature of each and every one of us from each culture, but we are born into narratives and cultures and religions and stereotypes and categories that frames us into becoming this. So if at a general level, I think, tuning down and trying to get back together. If you put people in a room, of different opinion, they don't tend to beat themselves, and chop or just to hit each other. So there are ways. And I think talking to each other, getting back into the physical space and trying to have civil conversations about challenges, I think this is a much more approach that is scalable if we do it at large, as in comparison to looking at like saving the world or tackling climate or some of these meta topics, right?
All right, excellent. With that, there's a fork in the road, and we're going down the positivity
Yes.
route at this stage. So, with that, I think I read something about you talking about evolution to godhood. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. What your thoughts on humanity potentially moving in that direction? I know what you're saying, I think, but could you spell it out a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, first of all, I'm very agnostic when it comes to the whole belief system. So more of an agnostic atheist. If there is like a God, a monotheism, I'm open to believing that, and I have greatest respect for any belief. So as long as it stays in the subjective, something that a lot of people need a solid ground to stand on. I don't. to that extent that I could go down some rabbit holes and ponder the simulation and all of these type of things. So the godlike abilities, basically what we're striving for, it seems, is that we are trying to create some kind of immortality, bliss, and divinity out of the machine. And that is basically a Deus ex machina scenario, God out of the machine. And I think this is like when we strive for enhancements, what are the um, the enhancements where we would stop, right? So if you could picture a scenario of getting your sight back, so you figure out how that works on a functional level. Why should you stop there? Why not go from infrared or zoom abilities or whatever, right? The same goes for hearing or whatever superpower. And this could go beyond any physical and mental limit. So say, okay, if you want to grow wings and fly, if we understand the structures of that, why not? And linking up our brain to some computer and having infinite access to free knowledge, these type of scenarios are basically, if you look at like the understanding of biology and chemistry and look at quantum physics and what we could do, they seem like they are within a range where there aren't currently a very clear argument against why we shouldn't be able to do it. And that leads me to conclude that, we could create quote unquote gods uh, to technology. And the following question is then, should we do it? Like, is a cognitive um, decline a compensation of that the same as the cognitive enhancement? So what are the natural capabilities and what are the super capabilities? And therefore this question becomes very relevant, because if you build it in a machine, then we are creating a superior entity in a machine externalized, which kind of sort of puts us in a position where we have created gods or superior a superior species to us. And I don't know if that's a good idea. Um, I don't know if it has a significant relevance to us. Maybe it also puts us in a position where we could have some kind of different state of consciousness and awareness where we could sit in awe and get a perfect injection of serotonin and dopamine and spiritual enhancements and whatever. So I think, this is basically when this evolution to godhood, if you like, um, this is always a question of um, what do we think that will be, right? So I could envision a future, and I've written about this, where the wonders that I cherish and value, namely to experience my own experience, a very simplistic way of understanding what to me success is. So I lived for years building companies and doing sport, and I didn't feel success. And today I feel very successful to me because I get to experience my own experience of progress. If I'm in a perfect state, upgrading some kind of mental enhancement, but I lose my subjective experience of that, I take out the wonders of life itself, the vitality, what it feels like to be something. And this is like the philosophical zombie scenario. So we could have some kind of superhumans or even godlike creatures, but they wouldn't have a perception of their own reality. So these are the things that I think about when it comes to that Deus ex machina scenario.
Yeah.
And I'm not so sure that it makes sense to build that in an external state. And I ponder obviously also the necessity and the outcome of doing it from an evolutionary standpoint of the human being. So it's a very interesting topic, very philosophical, very technical, very complex, of course. And when you start to go down that rabbit hole, it's hard to get back out. But
Yeah,
yeah, these are, yeah.
I think no, I think that's a great explanation about the theories and thoughts on that. I think we are generally moving not as far out as that, but incrementally. With CRISPR, you're starting to see things being fixed with genetic disorders, things like that, right? So I think it's a matter of time that people decide, okay, do we want to continue down this path or not? And what does that look like? It's going to happen. I mean, we're already looking at other species. You could actually, some might say that some parts of AI are another species. And intelligence will continue to move beyond our capacity as humans to understand, be more advanced than us. Now, you could call that a species, or do you believe that's something else?
But the problem here is that like many challenge this and say, well, that's not what, and man, this is too far out and this is too science fictional. And I argue that throughout my lifespan, the speed of progress is so insane. And the thing, the realness of the experience. So today we put on a goggle and we go into a virtual world, right? So we could argue that the experience of this virtual world is just as real as when we take them off because we experience it, right? And if you look at the laws of foundational physics and quantum mechanics today, and we look at like if we are going to simulate, the atoms of our physical perceived reality, we could do that with a powerful quantum computer. Now you could argue there will be not a quantum computer, but if that is true that it is possible, then we will do it. And then it's only about the time frame in which it happens, right? So if there is an argument against it, there needs to be a scientific explanation why it is not achievable. And this, a scientific explanation that something within physics is inaccessible to us, that's a very bold statement. So the argument is always on the other side. So if you come back to that simulation hypothesis, we wrote about the ex machina and the God experiment. Nick Bostrom in 2003 came up with these theories or these hypotheses where he had these three scenarios out of one holds to be true. One would be that there is some extinct event that happens, that humanity goes extinct. There's some pre-programmed thing into our natural reality. The other thing, the scenario could be we go bored. So we don't stop striving for progress. We just sit in awe or do other things. And the third scenario would be literally that progress is possible. And then it just holds to be true that it's just a matter of time. And as you see the exponential of progress, you would argue that it will happen sooner than later. And then, you take up all the big foundational questions from philosophy. What does it mean to be alive? What is life? What is the meaning of life? And so on and so forth. So I think there is, even though if it sounds like science fiction, it is much closer than we might think when we look at how things at the moment are progressing, unless you dive into that belief system that there is something beyond physicalism or something beyond the reach of our capacity to understand, which is obviously an argument, but it's very hard to place that argument when you look at how rapidly things are evolving, right?
Okay. I mean, absolutely right. And I love it. One of the last questions that I have, because I know we're short on time, is do you have any desire to go down timelines for anything to give people an idea of conceptually? Most people, when I ask that question, most people are like, I don't want to do timelines. But increasingly, there's a small minority of people that are starting to roll into this and say, you know what? I think we can start to see something, not like super far out things, but do you have any desire to throw out some timelines for anything?
No, it's scary to see how many people are correcting their timelines towards what Ray Kurzweil came out and said 30, 40 years ago, right?
Yeah,
But then again, it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like we hold on, and I myself also I romanticize with what it means to be a human being, right? We have some human traits, and I always ask, what do you mean by that? What is it that is human about us? And so I think, the notion you talked about AGI, that's a term, it's a difficult term to define what it means, but some kind of super intelligence that is capable of what like going beyond also what most human beings are capable of. I think, we're looking at next year to have very advanced math, very advanced programming. That's basically how we build progress. And as soon as, and you talked about that before with the defense and with the technologies, as soon as you have robots building robots and robots doing AGI research, that's where things speed up, right? And if you have a
hugely.
billion or start with 1 million humanoid robots walking around, and they're all learning simultaneously, one-to-one server. That's where the speed, right? If today you train 10 robots, but if like 100,000 robots are interacting with human beings, observing the perception of what we call reality and learning instantly and saving all this data into his kind of super high performance computing data center, that's where progress happens. And yeah, I think we're closer than we might imagine. But again, quantum physics might be off, and there might be some things that are not achievable, which could slow it down. But I think it would be wise to prepare and at least think about what implications of some kind of AGI within the next 3 to 5 years and some kind of path towards a technical singularity over the next decades would look like.
No,
So I think
wonderful.
that's what
My goodness. I totally agree. I think it's something we all have to think about at this stage. All right, Anders, the book is The Singularity Paradox, Bridging the Gap Between Humanity and AI. Thank you so much for joining today. It was wild to listen to your ideas on these things. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Tech Snippets Today with Joseph Raczynski.